Is it possible that Greg Koukl of Stands Against Reason is wrong? Or is he just spinning a yarn to make himself look more reasonable to the opposition? Stay tuned as we watch him spout off with some really silly claims. Oh look, Stands Against Reason has a new intro that actually looks pretty good. Too bad it doesn't do anything to improve their arguments, as this time Greg Koukl tries to pretend that he's open to being wrong, as he hides in his religious safe space where nobody can ever tell him that he's wrong. Sure, that sounds kosher. So let's go take a look at Greg making a fool of himself once again.
You know, in the ambassador material that we provide at Stand to Reason, of course, my goal for you is that you become a better ambassador for Christ.
Funny you say that, Greg, considering you turn off comments for all of your videos, and you never actually talk to atheists in your videos. You just preach to the choir. So I guess you don't want to be an ambassador for Christ after all. You just want to hide in your religious safe space. But please, tell us more, Greg.
And that's three areas of development: knowledge, an accurately informed mind; wisdom, an artful method, that's tactics essentially; and character is an attractive manner.
That was 5 things, Greg. Why does this remind me of a Monty Python sketch?
And so when I talk about character being an attractive manner, I mentioned that sometimes Christians err on one side or the other, and that is they're either too naughty or too nice, to put it simply.
Hey, lots of Christians tend to be pretty naughty, especially when you keep catching them with their hands in the proverbial underage cookie jar with their pants around their ankles. Or is that not what you mean?
In the area of being too naughty, there is a way that we can protect against being too dogmatic or harsh or grumpy or whatever, and that is to be willing to say to somebody who has a different point of view, we're willing to say, I could be mistaken about this.
But that's only valuable if you actually mean it, which, let's be honest, you don't. Because saying, I could be mistaken, means that you care if what you believe is factually correct, and you're willing to test your ideas objectively and reject them if they cannot be rationally justified. But we know this doesn't apply to the religious because they don't hold their beliefs rationally to begin with. They hold them emotionally. So the idea that they're going to toss out their ridiculous beliefs because they don't meet the requirements for intellectual scrutiny is silly. These are empty words when it comes to religion.
Okay, now that's a little bit controversial.
Not for rational people, it isn't. Now, I freely admit that I could be completely wrong about the Christian God. It could exist out there somewhere. But I've looked for the most evidentially verifiable position that I can find. I have set forth the things that would convince me that I was wrong, and I have been very clear that if those things ever came to pass, I would change my mind. And you don't see the religious doing that. In fact, people like Ken Ham and William Lane Craig are very, very clear that there is nothing that would ever change their minds. It doesn't matter what it is. They have dogmatically rejected even the slightest chance that they're wrong. And in so doing, they have revealed themselves to be irrational fools. And frankly, Greg, I don't think you're any different.
I use the phrase a lot. My mentor, J.P. Moreland, uses the phrase. I've heard other Christians use the phrase.
Unfortunately, you don't mean the phrase, because I don't think you can come up with a single situation under which you would actually reject Christianity.
I like the phrase because when I say to someone that I disagree with, who's advancing their own view, and then I give my counter view, when I say, well, I could be wrong about this, but here's my view and my reasons. When I say I could be wrong about this, it's a powerful statement that is an acknowledgement of my own fallibility so that I don't sound to the other person like I'm being inappropriately dogmatic.
And that's the thing. You're not saying it because you mean it. You're saying it because you think it makes you sound better to the opposition. You're not admitting to your own potential fallibility. You're trying to come off as less of a know-it-all douchebag to those you're debating. You don't actually mean any of it.
Now, I have had people say, well, you shouldn't say that. You're a Christian. You couldn't be wrong. And to that I respond, sure, I could be wrong. And guess what? I have been wrong.
Just not with regard to your own religious beliefs, I'm sure. Because again, your religious beliefs are held on dogmatically emotional grounds. They are things you desperately want to be true, whether or not they are open to rational evaluation or rejection on intellectual grounds. Because it doesn't matter to you whether or not they're correct, so long as they feel good.
Even on spiritual things. My theology has changed over the years, which means I changed to what I came to think was wrong to what I came to think was right. And maybe somewhere down the line, I might change it again.
I wouldn't be holding my breath. I can't imagine that you would ever reject all of Christianity someday, or better off, all of religion, based on the complete lack of objectively verifiable evidence for any religious tradition. Would I like to see you come to your rational senses and reject this ridiculous nonsense? Absolutely. Do I think that you ever will? Not a chance.
Now, my theology is not always constantly in flux, but I know that just like anybody else, my own biases can influence me. There's a thing called confirmational bias, and you always want to kind of stick with what you already believe, and it's hard to shake you out of that.
Not if you approach your beliefs intellectually and rationally, it isn't. Because then, your beliefs are not all about you and your feelings. It's about accepting the most logically defensible position that matches up with what we observe in objective reality and rejecting things that cannot be validated in any credible way. I accept what I accept because it's externally verifiable. I don't care if it makes me feel good. I don't care if I like reality. I deal with reality as it can be shown to objectively be.
So I want to be able to say to people, well, I could be mistaken, which signals that I am open to hear a contrary view.
Except you're not, which again, closed comments. You don't want to hear anything contradictory, and more importantly, you don't want your followers to hear anything contradictory. That's why you do it, and you're not fooling anyone.
I'm not going to be narrow-minded.
Yeah, sure you're not.
I don't have blinders on.
Absolutely you do, and you want everyone else on your side to have blinders on too.
I'm open to hear a contrary view, and if they have one that is well justified, they have good reasons for it, well, I'm open to changing my mind.
I don't buy that for a second, because if you were actually open to changing your mind, you wouldn't be religious now. Nobody would, because the objective evidence simply does not point to there being any kind of gods whatsoever. You can't get from here to there without relying entirely on emotion and wishful thinking. You want there to be a God. It makes you feel good to think that there's a God. Therefore, you believe because reality doesn't mean a thing to you in the realm of religion.
Okay, so I think the willingness to say, I could be mistaken, is actually a virtue.
If and only if you actually mean it. You have not convinced me that you do.
Okay, it shows that you are not being inappropriately dogmatic with other people. Now, listen, do not say that if you don't believe it.
Pot, call the kettle black, because there's no evidence whatsoever that you believe it. That's why all of your videos are aimed at religious believers and at comforting the already faithful, rather than taking on the opposition and trying to find out what's actually true.
It's not a ploy.
Absolutely it is. It is a means to convince your opponents that you are more reasonable than you actually are. Because if you spent your time saying nothing would ever change your mind like the aforementioned Ham and Craig do, then you would only appeal to the most fundamentalist of Christians, and that gets in the way of your cash flow.
It's not a rhetorical trick to sound more persuasive to people. If I don't think I could be mistaken on the particular issue in question, I don't say I could be mistaken.
But you could be mistaken on anything and everything, Greg. That's the point. No one is ever perfect, and as we learn more as human beings, everything has to be up for potential refutation. Everything. We could prove all of science wrong tomorrow. We could learn that we're all in the Matrix. It's not likely, but it isn't beyond the realm of extreme possibilities, and you have to be willing to put everything that you hold dear on the chopping block for rational evaluation. I can do that. You cannot.
I say I think I'm right, or I just move forward in a confident manner.
Only if you have a good reason to be confident, which I really don't think that you do. I think that you are overconfident in things, Greg. You want them to be so, and therefore you insist that they are. That's not the mark of a rational human being.
But if it's largely an open issue, or at least theoretically open, doesn't mean that I'm open to change if I have no good reason to do it. But I could be mistaken about what the New Testament says about Jesus of Nazareth.
No, there really isn't. You want it to be true. You just can't show that it actually is. I doubt you could come up with any standards for falsifiability for the story of Jesus. You can't say that if this reasonable thing happened, you would reject it because there simply aren't conditions under which you would ever reject it. Dogmatism and fanaticism are not things to be proud of.
But I don't think I am, because it's good history and there's a lot of reasons why we can trust in it, for example.
That's easily done. The question here is why you think it's a good history. You're the one making the claim. You need to back it up. And feelings and emotions and wishful thinking, those are not good reasons. Explain to me why you think that the writings of the primitive Hebrews are historically accurate, while the writings of the primitive Greeks and Romans are not. What is it about these stories that makes them more credible than other stories? Go ahead. Tell us, Greg.
But if somebody else thinks it's not good history, tell me why. I'll consider that. No problem.
Can I just say that I don't believe you and move on?
You see, what we want to do is we want to engage people in a thoughtful, gracious, and appropriately humble manner.
Says the guy who wants to think he's best friends with the creator of the universe. That's not being humble. Being humble is not pretending that you know things that you have no way of knowing. It isn't making claims that do not stand up to rational, objective evaluation. It isn't believing in books of mythology and rejecting everything that disagrees with them out of hand. Greg, you have no idea what being humble is.
Being humble is one of the characteristics of a good ambassador. That is, that we don't hang on to our own views any more tightly than our justification allows.
You mean your rationalization? Because I don't think you have any justification, at least not any objectively defensible justification, for anything that you believe.
We could be mistaken.
But you will never admit that you are.
And if I'm willing to say I could be mistaken, that allows me to have an open attitude to hear where I've gone wrong.
And how exactly do you think you can do that when you have your comments disabled and nobody can disagree with you? Do explain, Greg.
Or at least the reasons why people think I have.
What people think is irrelevant. You are either correct and operating in accordance with the evidence, or you are wrong and operating in opposition to the evidence. Guess which side you're on.
And that helps everything. It helps them, and it helps me too.
If you were actually willing to do that, maybe. But we all know that you're not, because we can watch how you and your ilk actually work in the real world, and we find that your claims are not the same as your actions. You can say, I could be wrong all you want, but unless you're willing to put your claim to the test, It's just empty words. What's really going on here is a form of shifting the burden of proof. It's insisting that others come and prove you wrong instead of you being able to prove yourself right. And then they take away the only means that anyone has on YouTube of actually challenging their beliefs, except for making response videos, which conveniently YouTube no longer automatically reports to the original video maker. So the Greg Koukls and the Andy Bannisters of the world can just pretend that they don't actually see any of it, and therefore they can go on unchallenged and preach the good word and all of that because they've purposely set up the system so that nobody can tell them or show them how wrong they are. And they wonder why they get no respect outside of their religious echo chamber. I don't wonder. I don't wonder at all.